Hello, and welcome to the Emerald Doorway podcast. Tonight, we're joined by Christie Smirl and Michael Magic Man. Smirl is a force to be reckoned with. She's an excellent poet and writer, a gifted musician in the realms of world music, dark ambient, and psychedelica. Her lyrics are usually mantras devoted to Kali Ma and other Eastern deities, or transmissions channeled and received from such forces. Beyond that, she is a Doctorette of Ayurvedic medicine, a nurse practitioner, a master of science from Lomalinda University, a yoga teacher, a Reiki master, and above all, a gifted and extremely well-read occultist, Kali Devotee, and a true practitioner of the left-hand path. Her books range from Tantric grimoires filled with channeled poetic incantations and strikingly violent, dark, and beautiful imagery, to detailed books on Ayurvedic medicine and even children's books. Her essays and contributions to Tumzantorum and Zazen Sounds cover complex and relatively unexplored subjects like medicinal cures for spirit possession and dealing with psychic self-defense in a truly approachable and pragmatic way. I found Christie to be extremely funny, knowledgeable, kind, empathetic, and found her to be an ideal guru and healer. Returning guest Michael Magic Man came to join us for one of our most potent and interesting interviews yet. I hope you enjoy it as much as we did. Okay, welcome to the Emerald Doorway podcast. My name is Wyatt, and today we are joined by Christie Smirl. How's it going?
Excellent. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. We also have our good friend Michael Magic Man, who is going to join us in the interview and chime in from time to time. How's
Yes,
it
yes.
going?
Well,
How you doing
um,
over there, Michael?
oh, good, good. Just hanging out. It's nice to see everybody. I'm sorry my camera doesn't seem to be working, but I'm here. When the cat jumped on my keyboard, changed something, and I'm afraid if I start punching buttons, I'm going to end up leaving the meeting or something like that. So maybe,
Oh, that's okay. We're just using audio today anyway, so
yeah, I figure it's not too big of a deal, and at least everything's working.
yeah. Plus,
So
the picture of your face kind of makes it look like you're there talking anyway, so.
yeah.
All right, well, Christie, we're so glad to have you. Christie is a wonderful writer and musician. She is a doctorate of Ayurvedic medicine, a nurse practitioner, a master of science from Lomalinda University, a yoga teacher and trainer, a Reiki master. Lots of amazing stuff. I guess I just kind of wanted to start out and ask you a little bit about where all this stuff started for you. Like, is this something that started in childhood? Did you have visions growing up?
Absolutely. So, when I was young, I had a very clear knowing of what I was going to do in life. And I had a lot of immediate direction in what I wanted to accomplish in life. And I knew at a very young age, of course, I was going to go straight into medicine somehow. And so that's what I did straight out of high school. And I had a lot of visions, but people didn't know what they were. They usually thought that I was a bit crazy, maybe schizophrenic. And so I learned really early on to not suppress it, but just not speak about it and not demonstrate anything along those lines. Because it oftentimes got me into the line of questioning. And so instead of being in the line of scrutiny, I just never shared any of my we'll call them mystical experiences.
Yeah. Did you find like specific people that you feel like you could open up to, but maybe like just the general populace would just kind of, you know, denounce it as insanity. So it's something you kind of had to keep inside, but did you have confidence that you could say like, you know, I had this profound vision?
Yeah, no, not as a child, not at
Oh
all.
wow.
Not even as a young adult, even into my 30s. I didn't have anybody in my life that I knew was familiar or even adept at knowing what I was talking about. And so I, for the most part, just never spoke of any of it.
Wow.
Mhm.
That is so interesting. And so when you went into medicine, and when you went in as a nurse practitioner, I'm sure you were dealing with, a lot of pain and a lot of death and things like that. Did that sort of widen your mystical experiences? Did you have visions associated with people dying and things like that?
It was interesting because I started working in medicine when I was 15. And
Mhm.
my first job at the age of 15 was a hospice job. And there were a lot of impressions or forward knowledge that I had, but I had already learned not to say anything. Because I knew that even if I said something, it was still going to happen. So of even speaking up. And then when I started working at the hospital, I worked at St. Bernardine's Hospital for nearly 30 years. And you see a lot of really interesting spiritual phenomenon that's difficult to explain. And, from time to time, I would have these wonderful experiences where maybe there was other staff present who either witnessed or were present during the same, we'll call it spiritual phenomenons. And so I knew that people were seeing what I was seeing, but I still just never really said anything. Every
Wow.
once in a while, I would speak to the patients
No.
if they were having some confusion, especially around death. They would speak of the spirits in the room. They would speak of, certain phenomenon, and they were scared. So in order to comfort them, then I would speak very frankly and openly to them about it. But it was more for their comfort rather than my mm, affirmation or confirmation of things
Yeah.
that were happening around.
So, I'm wondering, what kind of techniques or like, when you give someone comfort like that for, someone that might be listening that, might be a little bit antsy or thinking of in these directions, are there techniques or um, ways of framing things that you found to be, really helpful, to just your average Joe, so to speak?
I found one of the best techniques is just normalizing things rather than reacting in a way of, oh my, or oh, that's strange, or really. I would just say, yes, that's quite normal and quite common. And so that way the mystical or the spiritual phenomenon that was happening wasn't scary to them. And they had at least somebody who was their caretaker in a position of mm, being able to comfort them so that they weren't afraid on their deathbed or afraid when maybe their family members were transitioning. So for me, I think the easiest technique was normalizing it. And because I had to remember that just because I worked in a hospital 5 days a week and dealt with death and suffering and things like that, didn't mean that the people visiting had ever experienced it.
Yeah.
And
That's
so
just
it
it.
was
Yes.
easy just to say, this is normal and this is all right, and you'll be just fine.
Wow. So interesting. It's almost like maybe some of your patients were sort of the first actual people that you talked about some of these visions that you were having with.
Yeah. Yeah. Typically, I would speak to them only from their frame point, only from their point of view. I rarely would share with them any of my experiences or what I saw. Even if I was seeing concurrent things that they were seeing, I never embellished or added on to it because that would probably disturb them even more. Bhumi Mangala, Udaka Mangala, Agni Mangala. Gaganamangalam, Suryamangalam, Suryamangalam, Chandramangalam, Chandramangalam, Jagatmangalam, Jagatmangalam, Jivamangalam. At one point in my life, I just decided I was done working at the hospital. I was
Mhm.
done. And at first I thought, I'm going to take a break, maybe a couple months off of work. And I needed a long overdue vacation. And then COVID hit. And I was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
interesting. And I was really fortunate enough that the hospital was not busy in the department that I normally staffed. And so I was able to take an extended period off and then longer and longer. And then I was like, ooh, I can read, I can do other things. And, I started getting a lot more into what they would consider esoteric information. But prior to that, maybe I was in my mid 30s and I was at the peak of my medical career and I was content with what I had accomplished, but I didn't feel well. My mind didn't feel well. I was still struggling with a lot of stuff, mental debris, we'll call it. And so I started formally studying yoga. I had done yoga when I was a teenager, but it was just stretches and things like that, not advanced studies. And so I started studying yoga and incorporating it into my hospital work, and the patients really loved it. I started teaching the staff and whatnot, and that was all fine and dandy. But there was something much deeper I needed to know. And I eventually ended up studying Ayurveda and getting my doctorate degree in Ayurveda. But along with that doctorate in Ayurvedic medicine, there was a lot of new information I was exposed to. Uh, Simple things like, you have a subtle body. I was like, whoa, wait a second. I thought that was new age hippie crap? And so I started really trying to integrate what I was learning into my hospital work. And I had some success, and some clients and patients really took to it well. But at the same time, I decided I needed more information, deeper information. And that's when everything kind of went off the rails with music and art and writing. And it was quite unexpected. It wasn't what I had planned. I took a sabbatical from the hospital and then just never went back and took a deep dive into studies that were not applicable to my patients and not necessarily applicable to me.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So how did your connection with your contact with Cali sort of work its way into all of this?
Kalima, J. Kalima. I started seeing Kalima when I was 4.
Mm.
And being a non-Indian born person, being born in Pomona, California, I had no idea who Kali Ma was. I just knew that she was horrifying. She scared me. And at a certain point, I started seeing her more and more. But the first time I saw her, I was in a very strange, precarious situation that most people shouldn't find themselves in. And I had an outer body experience with her. And it was a beautiful experience, but at the same time, it was frightening because I didn't know which was scarier or less scary, what was happening, or having this outer body experience with Kali Ma. Eventually, as a young child, because I didn't know the association or have a spiritual mentor to help me with it, I started seeing her more and more, seeing decapitated heads and skulls and bugs everywhere and scorpions and classical Kali imagery. It was when I was about 8 years old. I had been transferred to live with my grandma for a while. And they did a lot of occult stuff. And I think that the environment heightened my energies in a way that it wasn't necessarily conducive for their living. And so each night I would wake up and I would see Kali Ma in my room. I would like an apparition in front of me. And I would wake up the rest of the house screaming down the hallway, and I would tell them all they were going to die.
Wow.
And I was pretty sure I was warning them of something good. And they thought, well, this is really becoming disturbing. So they ended up taking me to a metaphysical church in Pasadena. And that priest woman helped me out to a degree, but she still wasn't able to identify that it was Kali Ma. And it actually wasn't until I was in my 30s and studying Ayurvedic medicine, I told one of the Vaidyas that I was studying under about these images because I was having problems with sleep terrors and all sorts of strange residual psychic debris from a childhood. And I was describing, what this apparition looked like to me. And he said, "Oh, that's Kali Ma." And so I started looking at images of her and I thought, if only somebody had known this when I was small, there
Right.
might not have been so much chaos and confusion. But there were, other issues going on too. And, once I was able to embrace and know, like, that's the Holy Mother, it's not something frightening or someone frightening, then I was able to embrace the relationship and I
Yes, I'm wondering,
trigger.
uh, why do you think that Kali appeared in the wrathful form to
Mm.
you as a child?
She always appeared in the wrathful form as a child. One of the reasons why I know now is because when she appeared in that form, there were disgusting things happening that a decent mother would be wrathful over. But
Mhm.
I understood and took it as the wrathfulness that I had to witness was frightening. Once I would have my outer body experiences and be united with her, then there was no wrathfulness. It was just silence and stillness, like a warm black void. And I was able to differentiate, okay, I'm safe here. I wasn't safe there. Now that I've matured my relationship with her, now she doesn't always appear in the wrathful form.
I see. So, she often, appears in this form as what I've sometimes termed, and this might be a more new agey way to describe it, as a fear barrier, to keep us from, to teach us something or to sometimes to protect us.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, people that consult with you, what ways you maybe suggest that they get past these fear barriers, which in some ways are just fences that have to be hopped.
Hmm. When people approach me and they're having problems with fear in general, generalized fear, or specific fear over specific things, there's a certain point where we have to allow people to realize that fear is only a response. It's not a verdict. And that fear can be a fuel. Fear can be fantastic because it can get things done. And fear can be a excellent way of navigating a potentially harmful situation. When I talk to people about fear, typically they're able to sort out the fact that their active fear, their active vibration of thinking of the what if is not based in reality. And it's hard conversations sometimes, but typically people fear their own imagination and
This
they're
is true.
fearing something from an alternate dimension that doesn't even exist.
This
And
is
I
true.
often have to tell people, you're making it up in your head. If there's
Exactly.
an actual thing to fear at this moment, Big Bear came in through the front door. Okay, do something about that. But once that situation is over, if they're able to modulate their parasympathetic nervous system correctly, the fear response will fade off like an echo. But what they do is they actively choose to hold on to the maybes, the imaginary what ifs.
Yes, exactly. They assume a level of knowledge they don't possess.
Yeah. Or I just point out that they're afraid of something that doesn't even exist. They've created this situation in their mind. Now,
Yes.
sometimes there's something to be afraid of at this exact moment, maybe a bee in your bonnet or something. But other than that, I find that most people in the circumstances that they come to me for counseling don't have anything legitimate to fear. And that's when I have to point out, there's real stresses and then there's perceived stresses. And the
Absolutely.
majority of stresses that people encounter, I find, are only perceived.
Um, getting that well, I thought that might be a good segue to a question that I wanted to ask you, and also a reference to what I thought was an extremely interesting article that you sent me, which was the article that dealt, well, there are three that dealt with possession and Ayurveda.
Mhm.
So I wanted to I guess fear and dealing with the imaginary or perceived fears that different clientele will have when they visit you. Um, I wanted to talk to you because it was amazing to read through, all this information that I didn't know about the different elemental forms of possession, the Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. I don't know if I'm pronouncing them right. Forgive me if I'm not. Have you had like direct contact with these types of possession like in your practice?
Well, we have all sorts of varying degrees of insidious insanity that people go through.
Yeah.
In Ayurveda, usually they're able to identify the imbalance when it's just in the gut. And if the client doesn't change their ways, their eating, their lifestyle, their environment, then it goes out into the body. And eventually it crosses the 108 channels at the heart center and then invades the mind. So these elementals literally invade the mind. And once the mind is invaded, then the sanity becomes less and less stable. And there are examples, and yes, I have encountered clients who had extreme lack of self-control, indicating that either their sense organs were under a type of possession. And I have dealt with personal people and clients who had spiritual invasions that were beyond food and lifestyle. For some
Wow.
reason, it's something that comes to me often. I don't promote it, I don't advertise it. But oftentimes people do come to me and they know something is wrong, whether it be an endogenous elemental imbalance causing the insanity and possession, or whether it be exogenous spirits.
When you talk about extreme lack of control, like what does that look like? You're talking about like people maybe coming in with various addiction problems, or does it go beyond that?
Usually addiction problems. Well, it does go beyond that. Sometimes, well, it depends on what you consider an addiction.
Mhm.
I, one of my favorite sayings is that it always starts with an obsession.
Yeah.
And once the obsession takes place, it depends on what sense organ the obsession is taking place in, whether it's visual through the eyes, whether it's through a sense organ of like the nose or the ear, or through a karma organ of, say, the tongue, hands, feet, anus, or genitals. Some clients will come to me and they'll say, I don't know why this is happening in my life. And I'll go down the ticker tally list of their 5 sense organs and 5 karma organs just to determine if one is not appearing to be under their control. Because, let's face it, if there's a spirit in habitation, the last thing that spirit wants is for you to know it. Because if you know it, you can cause change and evict it. So, if a client comes and they say they have a severe alcohol addiction, or if they have a severe drug addiction, if they have a severe porn addiction, a self-inflicting harm addiction, there's a lot of different various things that people will, hide under their sleeve. But, when they come out and share it, you'll say, okay, it's not good for you, whatever it is. Maybe it's eating ding dongs and they're, sick because of their weight, whatever it is. And I'll say, we know that this is not helpful to you. And we know that it's causing mental problems, judgment problems, and that the obsession or the addiction or the non-sane interaction or non-sane interfacing is causing harm. So stop. And when they draw back and their eyes go a little bit big and they say, but I can't, then I know I'm dealing with something that's going to take a lot more time and determination with that person. And sometimes it is simply one of the elements that's deranged the mind. Like if fire element deranges the mind, you'll see things like violence, self-harm. You'll see, anger, loss of temper, etc. You'll see these unusual mood aberrancies.
Kind of an outburst, kind of an energetic outburst.
And,
So what sort of techniques or methods do you recommend to, kind of get them to cultivate that level of self-discipline so they can start dealing with their addiction or their problem?
the first thing I usually start with is, do they want help? If a
Sure.
person doesn't want help, in Ayurveda, in the texts of Charaka Samhita, they say don't treat the patient. Like they're not even considered a qualified patient if they don't want help. So that's the
Certainly.
step.
A smoker will never quit if they don't want to. Right.
Right, if they don't want to. So there's no use in wasting time and resources. Now, depending on the imbalance, I usually start with food. That's where Ayurveda almost always starts, even in cases of clinical insanity. We start with food.
Right. Okay.
If the client's not willing to change their food, again, I discharge them. I'm done. I'm not going to waste my time further. If the food is changed, then the lifestyle needs to be changed. And sometimes the lifestyle is something so simple as sleep hygiene or social hygiene or sexual hygiene.
Now, are there Ayurvedic correspondences in the sense that spicy food tends to excite, the libido and these sort of things? That's why Jains, for example, avoid them and that sort of thing.
100%.
So, someone who has a fire infestation, would you, for example, tell them, go eat some rice pudding, stay away from the tacos?
100%. No chilies, no tomatoes, no bell peppers, no onions, no garlic, no cayenne, no
Right.
salsa. And then sometimes that's the last time I get to talk to them because they're like, that's just too much for me to handle.
Do you have people that do want to quit, but like, well, I'm sure that you would, but they do want to quit, but they struggle with it, and they'll come back and they'll say, "Oh, I tried, but
Mhm.
maybe I
If
couldn't
they
do
come
all of this."
Absolutely. If they come back and they say, I tried, I'm still willing, I want to change, what I recommend at that stage is what they call Ayurvedic Panchakarma. So pancha is 5 and karma are actions. And depending on what elemental is imbalanced in them, they'll either do rasayana, like rejuvenate them so that the body is strong enough to repel away the imbalance, or they'll do things like virechana, where they, do a certain type of diet and then they give the client herbs and it will cause a lot of clearance of the bowels. Let's say it like that. That's the
Yeah.
best way to say it. And
Sure,
then
cleansing.
certain, yeah, and in certain settings, they also administer therapeutic vomina, which is vomiting. So usually we want to get the imbalanced element out of the body. And if they're willing to go to all of those extents, they will always be much better afterwards. Myself, for example, when I first started doing Ayurveda, I was willing to observe most of the food restrictions. I was willing to observe some of the lifestyle restrictions. Of course, we always promote, yogic behaviors, doing pranayama, breathing exercises, meditation, etc. But I underwent panchakarma, and it was like a complete personality transplant.
Wow.
It,
Interesting.
it was like taking 40 years of psychic debris, 35 years of psychic debris, and throwing it in the trash can.
Wow. I imagine that diet alone would do so much to the average person. Americans myself included, have terrible diets. It's just kind of equated with the low cost of corn products and the low cost of low quality food, the high cost of high quality food, things like that. And I yeah no I have a good friend, Tanner, who he swears by it. He eats extremely healthy and he exercises, and he says that that was like the end of him, that was like the end of him seeking psychiatric help, was just like diet and exercise. Do you often find that that's the case?
100%. 100%. In Ayurvedic medicine, that is usually the root cause of all physical, mental, and spiritual diseases. Food, they call it ahara vihara, diet and lifestyle. Um, I've had a couple clients before, they'll say, is there anything you could do for me? Let's say gout, for instance. They'll say, is there anything you can give me for gout, but without changing my diet and lifestyle? I say, no,
That would be a
no,
no. Yeah,
because that's the root cause of the actual.
absolutely.
Most clients who come in have never practiced some sort of formal breath technique. So instead of starting them with, funny exercises and things that they may be somewhat resistant to, I give them 10 minutes of breathing 3 times a day, depending on what is imbalanced. So, there's, let's say, 20 different breath techniques at least. Some are heating, some are cooling, some affect the digestive system more, some affect the nervous system more. So you go through that menu of different breath techniques and you select the appropriate one based off what their malady is. And I often tell them that there's a big difference between metabolic breathing, because you're breathing 24 hours no matter what. Your brain lets you do that without thinking. And then there's behavioral breathing or yogic breathing. And many times, once clients just break the old breathing cycle, they report tremendous improvement. It's like pulling out an old CD and putting a new program in. For instance, Kapalbhati. Kapal is a skull, Bhati is shining or light. So the skull shining breath technique, if you give this to somebody with appropriate medical screening, they can often change their entire digestion, their mood, their emotions, and even unprogram old childhood patterns. Because it's interesting how people aren't aware of how they breathe. A lot of times people are breathing short and shallow, like scared crickets. And other people are always breathing like they're angry. Oh, oof. And you're like, are you mad? And they're like, no, this is how I breathe. And I'll say, that's not good for your nervous system. Um, so there's so many yogic techniques. I just recently, a couple days ago, published my new book that goes over like what are the Ayurvedic imbalances, how is it manifesting in the gut, in the lungs, in the body, in the circulation, and how is it coming through in temperament and mood, and then what are the different breath techniques that are appropriate to apply, and what are the different asanas and positions to apply. And
Oh,
going,
that sounds really interesting. What's the name of that book?
that book is called Ayurvedic and Yoga Wisdom. I've been working on the book for about 6 years now, taking like all the little pictures and things like that. And so I was just able to finish it last week, and it's available on Amazon now.
That's
That's great.
awesome.
I'm
Mhm.
sure people will benefit from having practical methods available like that.
Yeah. It Ayurveda to me was such an eye-opener. I was like, how come we weren't taught this in medicine? I felt kind of ripped off. Here I finished so much medical oriented training, but I didn't know what a chakra was. I didn't know how to advise a patient how to meditate, how to do relaxation techniques. I didn't know that a human had a subtle body. I didn't know a lot of things. And the more I studied, I realized I need to share this with the people that I know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, that this new book is going to be so incredibly fascinating because in the world of occultism and esotericism, like you often come across passages about pranayama and pranayamic breathing, but they're so limited and they're so like, they'll basically give you an exercise, but to have specific exercises, that affect, specific outcomes for your overall well-being. I mean, that's the sort of thing that I think a person would want to seek out. That's really interesting. And I was going to ask you, like, what are some of the specific benefits of changing your breathing or practicing controlled breathing?
Oh my gosh, getting me started on pranayama benefits. So, first of all, when we select the correct pranayama, I've known a lot of people that say, "Ooh, I've been practicing this breath technique and now I feel like trash." I'm like, because the person who gave it to you didn't know anything about what they were talking about. So, the wrong pranayama can make you sick, can make you agitated, can cause cardiovascular stress, can cause a stroke or death, even. The correct pranayama method for a person, ideally, you're going to see better digestion first, better skin complexion, a more brightness of the personality. You should ideally see better sleep. If they have any pain, reduced pain. Pranayama, when we do it correctly, enables us to immediately modulate the nervous system. Like, imagine driving down the street in your car and then somebody saying, hit the brake. And you said, I don't know where the brake pedal is. That's how a lot of humans are walking around. And I'll say, hey, control your brain. And they're like, I don't know how to control my brain. And I'll say, well, then who's controlling it? So the first step of controlling the nervous system and the mind is through breath modulation. You know, um, once breath modulation is adopted into somebody's lifestyle, multiple times a day, not just once here or there, but multiple times a day, then they're able to have like that Pavlov's response, and you can just sit down and think about doing a breath technique, and boom, heart rate comes down, blood pressure normalizes, digestion improves, complexion improves. And when we're doing pranayama correctly, we should be able to infuse not only our pranic breath, not only our physical body, but we ideally will be infusing our subtle body with the correct frequencies of energy. Now, if we're doing the wrong pranayama or pranayama the wrong way, then we might be infusing our subtle body with, unhelpful types of vibrations and energies. Now, once a person is able to do pranayama, like in yoga, that's the fourth limb. And it's the fourth out of 8 for a reason, because without mastery of pranayama, rarely are people able to exhibit mastery over the fifth limb of yoga, which is pratyahara, to be able to actually systematically go into each sense organ, withdraw in with the ears, withdraw in from the eyes, withdraw in through the nose, the mouth, the tongue, and all of the karma organs as well. So that pratyahara is basically a prerequisite to the sixth, seventh, and eighth limbs of yoga, which are meditation, concentration, meditation, and then final yoking. And without pranayama, rarely can a person maintain sense organ and motor organ withdrawal, and rarely can they maintain meditation for very long. It's like squirrel. And you can watch a student sit and they'll have good breath control for like a couple minutes, and their eyes will be real still and their mouth will be real still, their fingers are still, and then they lose their breath concentration. They forget that they're supposed to be modulating their breath. And then you'll see their eyes start to dart back and forth. Their tongue will start moving in their mouth. They'll start fidgeting with their fingers. And that's when self-control is limited.
Yeah.
And, what's the goal of Ayurveda in yoga? Self-realization, self-mastery, self-control. And without pranayama, it's nearly impossible. Similar with like martial arts. If you don't have control over your breath, you're probably going to lose.
Yeah.
It's
And
true.
even in,
Interesting.
magical operations, if you can't keep your breath down pat and you can't keep that trance and you can't keep that focus of meditation and that linkage, there's probably going to be some flimsy outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. How would you define that? You were talking about the 8 limbs of yoga. The eighth limb of yoga, correct me if I'm wrong, is Samadhi. Is that right?
Yes,
How would you define that?
Samadhi. They say that the goal of yoga is to yoke with your soul, yourself with a capital S. And Samadhi is that state in which you interface everything with the soul. Your mind is completely surrendered to the soul, like a clear plane of glass. Samadhi is also said to be when you're able to go into yoking with higher dimensions or contacts beyond your soul, or the Atman, the universal soul. Samadhi, to take place, requires at least immediate liberation. Liberation from what is disturbing the mind, what is disturbing the body, what is disturbing the breath, so that that interfacing and connection can be made. Samadhi, they say, is a state of absolute bliss. And I never believed it. I was like, well, they say if you do yoga long enough, you'll be happy. I hadn't reached it yet, so I wasn't sure if it was real. And then once I was able to reach that stage, they said, oh, when you reach Samadhi, you'll find bliss. And I was like, oh, I think that's a pretty tall order to be filling there. And it is there. It
Wow.
is there. If we can interface all of our physical and non-physical sheaths and parts and basically snap them onto the soul without interference, then samadhi is not that difficult to reach. But it takes, in my opinion, maybe a decade of purification and determination. Maybe for some people it's quicker and easier. For some people who have maybe a squeakier, cleaner background, maybe not so much sewage work to do or
Oh
bathroom
yeah.
work to do,
Skeletons
they
in the
can,
closet.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they can often, they report being able to get there quicker and easier. But I don't know that many people personally and into, one-on-one knowing them who are able to reach samadhi. Of course, my spiritual teachers are able to. And we read about masters who are able to. And then the moment that we think we've reached samadhi, even if it's for a few moments in meditation, even if it's for a short period of time, I still recommend that we question. Maybe that's just the tip of the iceberg. What
Yeah.
if that's like samadhi level 101 and there's a level 1010, and to not be too excited of, I mean, to be excited, but not to be too content with like, ooh, I made it, I've arrived,
You're right.
and to
I've
keep
always had that explained to me by yogis as surrender.
yeah, yeah, surrendering deeper and deeper and deeper. And surrender's not easy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's yeah, it seems like some people, perhaps if they even achieve a small glimpse of samadhi, they might say, "Oh, I've been there, I've done that," and go on just sort of like acting like a guru for the rest of their lives. But that was just a tiny glimpse of like the work never ends ultimately. It's.
And they say when you reach samadhi that you reach self-realization. Self, what's the self? The soul. You realize you're a soul in a human body, and that this is just a temporary journey that we're on. It's like a class that we're taking. We're going to graduate this class and we're going to go into a different university. But samadhi, I believe that it should be a lifelong pursuit. Even
Yeah,
right now, I'm doing special practices under my teacher's guidance. And, there's moments where I really can connect in, or maybe I should say disconnect. I'm not sure which it is, but it's a definite change in how you feel during and after. And if somebody has said that they've reached samadhi, even for a fleeting glimpse, it, in my humble opinion, should be so profound that it changes their life forever. And
yeah,
there should be clear evidence of personality uh, embetterment, if we want to say that.
yeah.
Do you think there's an element of communion involved here with the ideal, the deities?
100%. And the communion, I believe, for some people is how they're going to reach samadhi. But eventually we have to go in and do it by ourselves as well. Um, Communion with the deities is one of the most precious practices that can be done. But it takes time, and it takes sometimes good teachers to help you do it correctly so that you don't
That was going to
come.
be one of my next questions. I wondered what value you place on person-to-person instruction, the guru-student relationship.
I will say that When I first started spiritual practices, I had very little trust and very little faith, so I didn't have a guru because I didn't trust people, and I wasn't going to submit to a human, that's for sure. And then one time I was in India and I met my spiritual mother, my spiritual guru, and she has given me, lots of one-on-one education and directions, which I've taken with great, great
Hmm.
weight and have done all the things that she's asked me to do. And I have seen tremendous results. Um, Subsequently, I also have a spiritual father that I trained in and am still training in Tantra and Himalayan shamanism. And I personally, having studied previously on my own and having studied with gurus, not self-proclaimed gurus, but people who have been appointed gurus, there's a big difference. And I have had tremendous growth. If it had been a group situation, I do not think that I would have received the same benefits, particularly because of my background situation. Um, I believe that every individual may benefit more greatly from one-on-one personal instruction. I do a lot of group classes. Every Sunday we have, classes here at the ashram, and sometimes there's, up to 8 students. It's a small space, and they're going to receive a lot of really good information. However, that information, if I give it one-on-one, because I also offer private mentorship and spiritual development, those students tend to excel the fastest because it's just them and I. I'll say, okay, well, what's happening this week? Or what's happening this month? Where are you at? Oh, potato chips. Huh? Okay, fine. Okay, all right. You had a hiccup here or there. Are you doing this sadhana? Did you go back to that sadhana? Let's start a new sadhana. Let's do some backwashing and cleaning and clarifying. Whereas when it's a group class or when it's a self-help, self-study, I think that people oftentimes what did that person call it? Cafeteria style picking their spiritual practices. They'll
Certainly,
say,
you have
this
to
works
homogenize the
for me.
message some. Certainly.
Yeah. They'll say, this works for me, that works for me. And, oh, wow, I don't know about that. I'm not going to practice that. And they might make tremendous strides. And they may even reach Samadhi that way. Fantastic. For myself, I needed private instruction.
Yeah, it seems like at the group level, you would have people that were maybe holding back because they wanted to save face, among other people. One-on-one would be more prone to like a person would be more prone to being intimate, to opening up, to revealing secrets, there's more trust, I feel like, in a one-on-one setting than if you're opening up around 8 to 16 people.
I agree. Absolutely. Like the things that I've been able to tell my spiritual teachers, I would never tell anybody else.
Yeah.
And it's nice to have a personal instruction because then you can say, I had a hard time with this, or I didn't like that, or I resisted this, or you know what, I just didn't do it, or whatever the situation is. And the teacher can, if it's the correct relationship, that teacher can help you work through those, maybe their imbalances, maybe their priorities. And I know for myself, without a living guru, I would not have made it this far.
Certainly, they can tailor the experience more finitely.
Definitely.
So I wanted to ask you also about one of several extremely interesting books that you sent me. But you sent me, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing this. I believe it's called the Dasham Havidya Gita.
Yes,
That
the
was
Dharma
a
ideas.
that was such a profoundly interesting book. That and Mother Gnosis blew my mind with the artwork and the poetry. But yeah, speaking specifically on this book that is dedicated to 10 tantric goddesses associated with wisdom.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit on them?
Mm. Well, that all started when I was studying under Krishna Kali Das, my spiritual father. And I was embarking on a over a year-long sadhana, of each of the wisdom goddesses. There's 10 of them. And from month to month, sometimes a little bit longer than that, I would receive special instructions and I would do special practices. And it was so intense. I mean, it was just revolutionary, actually. Most days encompass doing 10 rounds of 108 mantras. So one round is 108 repetitions, and I would do 10 rounds a day, every single day, and rituals, etc., etc. And I was maybe 1 week finished with that over a year-long practice. And I sat down. I had had a distressing week. My mother had received a bad medical diagnosis. I had had some magical mishaps. And I sat down and wrote that book within a few days. And to be honest, I don't remember writing it.
Really? Wow.
All of the images that the 10 like plated images I did within about 2 days. I don't know how. I was just up at all hours of the night drawing them, but that's how things work with me.
Is it kind of
I work
channeled?
with them now.
Would you consider it a channeled text?
Some of my work is channeled, definitely. This one, I would say, is a reflection of the year-long sadhana I did. And without being on drugs or alcohol, the fact that I don't remember writing it, I suppose that indicates it was inspired. Um, most of it was written in trance. But that's
Wow.
what I often will do. I'll go in, I'll do my 10 rounds, I'll meditate, I'll be in this state. And then when I finally come out of the state of communion, I would stand up and there'd be 10 pieces of paper scrawled everywhere. And I was like, oh, I guess I was busy writing here. Okay. And then I started compiling it all. And I got a call from an esoteric publisher that was interested in some of my works on Kali Ma. And so I took some of my other writings, basic stuff like the praxis portion of that book, and incorporated that into it and said, well, here you go. It's in honor of Kali Ma.
That
And with
Zazen Sounds. Yeah.
with blessings from my teachers, I sent that off to Zazen and they published it and it was sold out in a day. It was gone.
Wow.
I haven't republished it yet, but probably late this summer. Without any spoiler alert, there will be a large compilation of a lot of my previous works that are now either unpublished, unavailable through Sirius Esoterica Limited.
Oh, nice. Oh, through Edgar Kerval.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, we almost had him on the show too. We might still.
oh,
He's a great
wonderful.
guy.
Yes. So that book ended up just spilling out, basically, and it's one of my favorite texts. I have
Yeah.
Holy Havans here usually once a month now, big fire rituals to the mother, and usually I do readings out of the book because we honor the 10 forms of the mother during those fire ceremonies.
Yeah. Do you want to talk at all on the 10 different forms of the goddess?
Oh, I would love to. So, Kali Ma is considered the primordial mother, the Adi mother. And in the particular line of study that I was doing, there are 10 forms of her. So there's certain practices, there's 8 forms, some have 7 forms, some have 3 forms. But the Dasha Mahavidyas are more consistent with the Tantric studies I was doing. So Kali Ma, of course, is first. And she's considered just this beautiful form of the mother that arrives in all black, or sometimes they call her sky clad, Digambara, and she wears the sky on her skin. Her second form is Tara. And Tara is associated with like the water element. And Tara is very associated with the Bija Om. And that the chanting of Om helps us ferry across the abnormalities or choppy waters of our emotions and delivers our mind back to the primal mother so that we restore our minds. And then we have the third form of Kali Ma. We have varying names, but Shodasi is considered the third form, and she's, forever young, forever innocent, forever beautiful and pure. But there's this excellent quality of purity and beauty. And this was a form of Kali Ma I hadn't come across in, my limited American exposure. And so when I started studying these forms of Kali Ma, I had only really had contact with the fierce form, the Ugra or angry form. And so it was
Right.
beautiful to see these delicate forms of Kali Ma, draped in beautiful gowns and with this beauty and innocence and peacock feathers, etc. Then the fourth form, we have the space element coming out. So we have Bhuvaneshvari. And Bhuvaneshvari, I love what Baba says that this is a form of Kali Ma who has already set the stage. She sets the sequence and the orders of things. And Guru Ma always says, Kali Ma is always 10 steps ahead of you. You just have to have faith that the stage is already set and you need to know how to do your part and what is not your part to do. Then the fifth form, we have Bhairavi. Bhairavi, and she's seen, in this burning smashan and in the graveyards. And of course, she's not dressed either. And she's got blood smeared across her chest and she's got some weaponry in her hands. But really, what this signifies is the form of the mother that is fire, tapas, burning, discipline, being able to execute our life's will and get things done. Of course, there's a lot of other things related to her. I could talk for too many hours if I don't keep it too short. And then we have the sixth form of the mother, which many people are disturbed by, Chinnamasta Ma. In Chinnamasta, she's seen as self-decapitated. It reminds me of when I was young. I used to always have these visions of horrific, heads in the closet and decapitated people, and I didn't understand it, but now I understand it a lot more. So Chinnamasta is sometimes disturbing to people because she has 2 attendants who are drinking the blood that come out from her head, and she's also drinking, well, her decapitated head is drinking the blood from her severed neck. And this is also representing self-sacrifice. One of the best offerings we can give Kali Ma is a coconut, a beautiful coconut. It's considered a perfect offering. So when we do puja, wave the coconut, we set it up in a certain special way. And sometimes when we do ritual, we take the coconut, we take a nice big knife, like a kukuri knife, and whack! And we pop the coconut open, and then we offer it over the Shiva lingam. And it's representing the decapitation of your ego or the ultimate sacrifice, sacrificing all of your mental fetters to the mother. And Chinnamasta requires this of us. And there's a lot of other esoteric meanings behind Chinnamasta, like her two attendants being Rajas and Tamas, or the Ida and the Pingala, or the three streams of life coming from her neck. Then we have the next form after Chinnamasta, which is another somewhat unsavory form of Kalima that people shy away from, but we can't shy away from the harder parts. It's Dhumavati. And Dhumavati is, seen as like the widow, the hag, the crone. Um, she's sitting in this chariot with wrinkled skin and flat, saggy breasts and disheveled clothes, and her hair is just kind of nothing really looks glamorous at all. And her cart doesn't go anywhere, and there's usually crows around, but they're not looking very auspicious at the same time either. And usually the only thing you see Dhumavati holding is this winnowing basket and kind of sifting through the rubble of our life. And Dhumavati is very associated with smoke. It's usually very smoky and gray, and it's a time of our life when we're with Dhumavati when things are maybe painful or dark, or after we've had that fall, bam, and we're waiting, to recover and to pull out of things. And when we see that the mother is there even in these dark times, then we can call out to her. We say, Jema, 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 there you are. Even in my pain and my suffering, you're still with me. I see you. And we can still commune together even when things kind of suck. And then we get Bagalamukhi, and she's seen like standing with this club over her head, and she's got a demon usually that's, prostrate on its knees in front of her, and she's got its tongue snatched in her hand, and she's about to just bash the demon on the head. And, Bagalamukhi teaches us stambhana, stop. And by seeing the tongue stuck out like that, one of the things that Bagalamukhi teaches us is, shut up. To quit talking so much, to listen a little bit more, to stay still, to trust more. But really, Bagalamukhi also teaches us a lot of important things about how to control our tongue, how to control ourselves. And when we're in the grips of Bagalamukhi, we're usually in this standstill, but there's still motion. Baba describes it like, imagine building a dam. You have to stop the water, but the water is still flowing and it's kind of circulating and eddying and getting ready to flow. That's where we are with Bagalamukhi. So there's movement, but we're kind of frozen still. Or I like to say we're unripe fruit. And then after we make it through that phase with Bagalamukhi, we go into our union with Matangi. And Matangi, she's seen with this beautiful emerald green skin and bright red eyes, and she might have some liquor bottles strewn around her and books and paint pens and artistry, because she's the left-hand path version of Saraswati, the giver of arts and knowledge, and to be able to express oneself, whether it's through written word or artistry or poetry or even dance.
He's kind of the tortured artist.
Well, she's the left-hand path artist, I suppose.
Yeah.
Her eyes are bright red, and she loves wine. So it's definitely a left-hand path type of thing. And then once we are moving beyond Batangi, we get the 10th form of Kalima, which is Kamala. And she's standing in this beautiful lotus flower. She's dressed in all white, all purity. She has her hands raining out in the boon-giving mudra, and there's just coins and prosperity flowing out of her hands. And she has no weaponry anymore. No more weaponry. There's no knives, no clubs, no heads, no bowls, no blood, nothing. She's perfected and in all white. So, we go from Kali Ma in stage 1 of this beautiful black mother, and we go through all these different phases of self-purification and reckoning with ourselves and reckoning with the divine in very beautiful ways. And ideally, we come out with this sense of purity. Kamalama in the left-hand path is equivalent to Lakshmi in the right-hand path. Lakshmi is usually seen with the coins coming out of her hands, signifying boons or blessings or prosperity. And the first time somebody goes through the Dasha Mahavidyas, I for sure recommend having a qualified teacher, or you might just end up on the banks of some, ditch in your spiritual mind.
Right.
Because they're very, very powerful forms of the mother. We always have to remember that when we work with types of the mother, forms of the mother, we need to have a clear teacher. I've had many people approach me over the years and they'll say, I'm really interested in working with Kali Ma, but I worked with her like 10 years ago and everything went to hell and back and it was terrible. And I'll say, let me ask you something. Do you know who Ganesha is? And if they're not clear about Ganesha, I'll say, that's probably why you had such difficulty working with the mother. Because Ganesha always guards her gate. And if you can't prostrate and give honors to Ganesha, Ganesha's instructions are to bash you about.
This concludes part 1 of our interview with Christie Smirl. Stay tuned for part 2 coming soon. Thanks for listening to the Emerald Doorway podcast. Once you've entered, there's no turning back. There's only one way to move, and that's forward. If you're listening on YouTube, please like and follow. If you're listening to on Apple or Spotify, please give us that 5-star review.